There is a place between the stars where light goes to die. Not darkness in the way a child fears the night, but something older, something patient. The Vethrani call it the Shroud Expanse, a region of space so empty that even their ancient cartographers, beings who had mapped the burning hearts of quasars and the frozen tombs of dead galaxies, had simply drawn a line around it and written nothing. For 12,000 years, the Vethrani ascendancy had accepted this as truth. The Shroud Expanse was void. It was absence given form. It was the universe's way of saying that some places were never meant to hold meaning. Fleet Commander Thyra Vel-Korath stood at the observation deck of the dying warship Eternal Vigilance and watched the stars burn. Not the distant stars. Those remained cold and indifferent as they had for eons. No, these were the stars of her people, colony worlds, fortress systems, the blazing pyres of a civilization that had believed itself eternal. She was old by Vethrani standards, 412 cycles, her carapace graying at the joints, her compound eyes no longer as sharp as they had been when she first earned her commission. She had served the ascendancy for 3 centuries. She had never known defeat.
Until the HFY came.
The enemy had emerged from the galactic core 18 months ago, a swarm of silicon-based predators that consumed everything in their path: worlds, ships, stations, even the stellar matter of suns. They did not negotiate. They did not respond to communications. They simply fed, reproduced, and advanced. The ascendancy had thrown everything against them. 12 great fleets, the combined military might of 47 allied species, weapons that could crack planets and tear holes in the fabric of space itself. It had not been enough. Commander. The voice belonged to Sub-Commander Ureth, her second. He approached slowly, his movements carrying the exhaustion they all felt. The last refugee convoy has departed for the outer territories. 3 million souls. It's all we could save from Vethrani Prime. 3 million. The capital world had held 19 billion. Thyra did not turn from the viewport. Her reflection stared back at her, a creature of angles and purpose, now hollowed by loss. And the HFY advance? Unchanged. They will reach the hegemony's core systems within 6 rotations. After that, Ureth's voice faltered, after that, there is nowhere left to run. She had known this, of course, had calculated it herself a dozen times, hoping the mathematics might somehow change. They never did. The Vethrani ascendancy, 12,000 years of culture and achievement and civilization, would be extinct within a standard month.
"There is one option we have not considered," she said quietly.
Ureth stiffened. "Commander, surely you don't mean—"
"The Shroud Expanse." The words felt strange on her tongue, forbidden almost. "Our long-range sensors have detected anomalies, signals. Something lives in that void, Ureth, something we never bothered to look for."
"The quarantine exists for a reason." Ureth's voice carried the weight of ancient doctrine. The founders sealed that region of space 8,000 years ago. They said whatever dwelt there was too dangerous to contact, too primitive to— Primitive. Thyra finally turned to face him, and something like bitter amusement flickered in her compound eyes. "Look around you, Sub-Commander. Look at the burning worlds and the scattered fleets. Look at the extinction of everything we have ever built, and then tell me what primitive means."
Ureth had no answer.
"Set course for the Shroud Expanse," Thyra ordered. "Maximum sustainable velocity. We go to beg for help from whatever the founders feared so much they tried to pretend it didn't exist.
The journey took 11 days. 11 days of watching the distant light of dying systems fade behind them. 11 days of monitoring communications that grew increasingly desperate, increasingly silent. The hegemony fell on the 4th day. The crystalline collective, ancient allies of the ascendancy, sent a final transmission on the 7th. We die with dignity. Remember us. By the 9th day, there was nothing left to monitor. The Vethrani had consumed everything behind them, and ahead lay only the emptiness of the shroud.
Except it wasn't empty. The first sign was a signal, weak, structured, clearly artificial. Thyra's communication officers spent hours trying to decode it before realizing it was not encrypted at all. It was simply different. A pattern of mathematical constants woven into a carrier wave, almost like a greeting.
The second sign was the station.
It hung at the edge of the shroud like a sentinel, a structure of metal and composite materials that seemed almost crude compared to Vethrani architecture. No flowing lines, no bioluminescent panels, no anti-gravity spires. Just angles and functionality, lit by harsh white lights that cut through the darkness.
"Ancestors preserve us," Yareth whispered. "It's real. The founders weren't just being paranoid. There really is something out here."
Thyra studied the station, her tactical mind cataloging its features. Defensive systems, minimal, almost token. Docking bays, large, designed for vessels of various configurations. And markings, symbols she had never seen before, repeated across the hull in what might have been identification or warning. "Open a channel," she commanded. "All frequencies. Let them know we come in peace." The response came within minutes, not in the Vethrani language, but in a rough approximation of it, clearly generated by translation software. "Unidentified vessel. You have entered protected space. State your origin and intention." Thyra took a breath. "This is Fleet Commander Thyra Velkoreth of the Vethrani Ascendancy. We seek sanctuary, assistance. Our civilization has fallen. We are all that remains." A long pause. Then proceed to Docking Bay 7. You will be met. The beings who met them were smaller than Thyra had expected. Bipedal, soft-skinned, lacking any natural armor or obvious weapons. 2 of them stood at the docking bay entrance, dressed in simple gray uniforms, their expressions unreadable to her alien eyes. One stepped forward. A female, Thyra thought, though she was not certain. The being's voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. "Commander Velkorath, I am Director Sarah Chen, Frontier Station Artemis. Welcome to human space." Human. The word meant nothing to Thyra. "You are the species that dwells in the shroud?" "We prefer to call it home," Chen said. There was something in her tone, not hostility but perhaps wariness, though I suspect your people had other names for this region, names that suggested we weren't worth visiting. Thyra felt a flicker of shame, though she did not fully understand why. "Our records indicate this space was quarantined, sealed. We were told nothing of value existed here." "Nothing of value." Chen's expression shifted slightly, a small movement of the muscles around her mouth that Thyra would later learn was a smile, though it held no warmth. "Yes, we're familiar with that assessment." The station's interior was as functional as its exterior. Clean corridors, efficient lighting, surfaces that prioritized durability over aesthetics. Thyra found herself studying the humans they passed, technicians, officers, civilians. All of them seemed calm, unhurried, as if the universe beyond their borders was not actively being devoured by an unstoppable predator. "You seem surprised," Chen observed. "I expected more," Thyra admitted. "Your technology appears functional but limited. Your population here seems small. I do not understand how your species has survived in this region for so long." Chen led them into a conference room, a simple space with a table, chairs, and a large display screen. "Please, sit. You've come a long way, and I imagine you have much to tell us." The next several hours were among the most difficult of Thyra's life. She recounted the fall of the Ascendancy, the emergence of the Kethvari, the desperate battles and the mounting losses. She described the consumption of Vethrani Prime, the screaming silence of evacuated colonies, the faces of the dead that haunted her dreams. Chen listened without interruption. Her companion, a male introduced as Captain David Okonkwo, took notes on a small device, his face betraying nothing. When Thyra finished, silence hung in the room like a weight. 19 billion, Chen said finally. On your homeworld alone. Yes. And you estimate the total casualties across all affected systems at... Thyra's voice was hollow. 400 billion confirmed, perhaps twice that number unaccounted for. The Kethvari do not leave survivors. Chen and Okonkwo exchanged a glance that Thyra could not interpret. Then Chen folded her hands on the table and spoke carefully. "Commander, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. In all the centuries your people observed this region of space, all the times you chose not to make contact with us, did you ever consider what we might have become?" The question struck Thyra like a physical blow. I don't understand." "Your founders quarantined this space 8,000 years ago," Chen continued. "At that time, we were still learning to work bronze. We had not yet invented writing. We were, by any metric you might have used, a primitive species on a single unremarkable world." She paused. "That was 8,000 years ago." Thyra felt something cold settle in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm asking what you think happens when a species is left alone for 8 millennia, when it has no one to trade with, no one to learn from, no one to rely on but itself, when every challenge it faces must be overcome through its own ingenuity or not at all." The cold feeling spread. Thyra looked at the simple walls, the functional furniture, the unassuming humans before her, and for the first time she wondered if she was seeing what they wanted her to see. "Your station," she said slowly, "this outpost, it is not representative of your civilization, is it?" Chen's smile returned, still without warmth. "This is a frontier monitoring post, Commander. It exists to watch the borders and greet visitors like yourself. It is designed to be unintimidating." "And beyond these borders?" Chen stood and moved to the display screen. With a gesture, she activated it. What appeared was a star map, but not like any star map Thyra had ever seen. The Shroud Expanse, that region her people had dismissed as empty void, blazed with light. Thousands of systems, tens of thousands, all connected by lines that indicated trade routes, communication networks, infrastructure that spanned what should have been impossible distances. "The United Earth Confederacy," Chen said quietly. 12,000 inhabited worlds, approximately 800 billion citizens. We have spent the last 6,000 years building, expanding, and preparing. Thyra could not speak, could barely breathe. "Preparing for what?" Yereth managed.
Okonkwo spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. For whatever came out of the dark, we always knew something would eventually. The universe is too large and too old for it to be otherwise.
You knew, Thyra whispered. You knew something like the Kethvari would emerge.
We didn't know what form it would take, Chen said, but we knew the universe was not kind. We knew that civilizations rose and fell, that predators evolved to consume prey, that entropy was the only constant. So we prepared, we built, we unified, we became. She trailed off, searching for the right word.
Ready, Okonkwo finished.
Thyra stared at the star map, at the sheer scale of what her people had ignored for 8,000 years, and felt the weight of history crushing her. We called you nothing. We drew a line around your space and wrote that there was nothing here worth knowing.
Yes, Chen said simply. You did.
And yet you receive us. You offer sanctuary.
Chen turned from the display, and for the first time Thyra saw something other than professional detachment in her eyes, something that might have been compassion, or might have been pity. Commander, we have been alone in the dark for 8,000 years. We have had no allies, no mentors, no one to tell us how the universe worked or what dangers awaited us. We built everything ourselves, not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice.
She returned to her seat, leaning forward slightly. But we also remember what it was like to look up at the stars and feel small, to face threats we didn't understand, to wonder if we would survive. We are not your founders, Commander. We do not believe in abandoning others because they are inconvenient.
Thyra felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. You will help us? We will do more than that. Chen's voice hardened. The Kethvari have made themselves our concern by approaching our borders. They have consumed civilizations and murdered billions. They have proven themselves a threat to all life in this galaxy. She stood again, and there was nothing soft about her now. They will be stopped.
You don't understand, Thyra said. The Kethvari cannot be stopped. We threw everything we had at them. 12 fleets, weapons that could—
I read your tactical data while you were speaking, Chen interrupted calmly. Your fleet doctrine emphasizes individual ship superiority and decentralized command structures. Your weapons technology, while impressive, prioritizes precision over volume. Your defensive strategies are built around the assumption that wars are fought between rational actors who can be negotiated with or deterred.
She shook her head. None of those assumptions apply to the Kethvari. They are a consuming swarm. They do not think, they do not negotiate, they do not stop. You tried to fight them as if they were a rival civilization. They are not. They are a natural disaster.
And you know how to fight natural disasters? Thyra's voice was skeptical, almost desperate. Chen's expression did not change. We were born from them, Commander. Our species evolved on a world of earthquakes and hurricanes, of ice ages and extinction events. We have been fighting natural disasters since before we understood what the word meant. She touched a control, and the display changed again. What appeared was not a star map now, but something else. A visualization of ship movements, fleet positions, logistical networks. Arrows converging from across human space toward a single point.
The Kethvari are currently 3 days from our border. In that time, approximately 412 billion Kethvari organisms will attempt to enter our space. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. They will be met by the combined fleets of the United Earth Confederacy, not individual ships, not detached squadrons, the entire military apparatus of humanity unified under a single command structure with a single objective.
How many ships?
Yareth asked.
42,000 capital vessels, 800,000 support craft, approximately 300 million active personnel.
The numbers hung in the air. Thyra struggled to process them. The Velanthi ascendancy at its height had maintained perhaps 2,000 capital ships. The Kethvari swarm had seemed overwhelming when it first emerged. Now she realized it had simply been fighting adversaries who had never imagined war on such a scale.
"This is not possible," she said weakly. "No civilization maintains such forces. The cost, the logistics—"
"The cost of not maintaining them is extinction," Okonkwo said. "We learned that lesson long ago. Humanity does not build for comfort, Commander. We build for survival."
Chen moved to the door. "You and your crew will be given quarters here while the operation proceeds. You'll have access to our communications network if you wish to observe. I suggest you do. You may find it educational."
She paused at the threshold. "And, Commander, I would rest if I were you. What happens next will happen quickly, and I suspect you will want to be alert for it."
Rest did not come. Thyra spent the hours instead in the station's observation lounge, watching the darkness beyond the viewport and trying to reconcile what she had learned with everything she thought she knew.
8,000 years. Her people had dismissed humanity as primitives for 8,000 years, and in that time, in the silence and the void, humanity had become this. Not through conquest or exploitation, but through sheer, relentless determination. They had faced the universe's indifference and responded by making themselves impossible to ignore.
Yareth found her there, his own expression troubled. "Commander, I have been studying their historical archives. They granted us access as a gesture of goodwill."
And they nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. Wars, environmental collapses, technological disasters. Their history is one of constant crisis, constant adaptation. Every generation faced challenges that should have ended them, and every generation found a way forward.
He hesitated. There is a word they use, resilience. It does not translate well into our language. The closest approximation is the capacity to absorb damage and continue functioning. But that is not quite right. For them, it is more than that. It is almost religious. A core belief that no matter how bad things become, there is always a way through.
Thyra thought of her own people, of the elegant spires of Velanthi Prime, now Ash, of the sophisticated philosophies and artistic traditions and political systems, all consumed by mindless predators. The ascendancy had believed itself advanced, enlightened, above the crude struggle for survival that defined lesser species.
And now they were nearly extinct, while humanity, primitive humanity, nothing humanity, had built an empire in the void and was preparing to fight the very monsters that had destroyed everything she loved.
"We were fools," she said quietly.
"Commander?" We looked at them and saw only what they lacked. Their crude technology, their short lifespans, their violent history. We never asked what those things might produce over time. We never considered that a species forged in constant struggle might become something. She trailed off, unable to find the word. "Something terrifying?" Yareth suggested. Thyra nodded slowly. "Something terrifying, and something magnificent."
The first reports came 12 hours later.
Thyra had been given access to the Human Command Network, a gesture of transparency that she suspected was also a quiet demonstration of confidence. They were not worried about her seeing their strategies, their fleet positions, their communications. They wanted her to see. The Cathvari swarm entered human space at 0347 station time, a wave of silicon-based organisms numbering in the hundreds of billions. They moved as they always did, mindless, relentless, consuming everything in their path.
They were met by the Second Fleet.
8,000 ships, arranged not in the elegant formations Thyra knew from Volanti doctrine, but in overlapping defensive patterns that prioritized concentrated fire and mutual support. The human vessels were not individually impressive, smaller than their Volanti equivalents, less graceful, less sophisticated, but there were so many of them, and they moved as one.
The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 4 hours.
Thyra watched the tactical displays with growing disbelief. The humans did not fight the Cathvari as enemies, they processed them. Each wave of the swarm was met with calculated, overwhelming firepower, weapons that sacrificed precision for volume, missiles that fragmented into thousands of sub-munitions, energy beams that swept across space like scythes, harvesting silicon bodies by the million.
And when the swarm adapted, as it always did, the humans adapted faster. New patterns, new weapons, new tactics, all implemented within minutes, coordinated across thousands of ships with a unity of purpose that should have been impossible.
"They are not reacting," Thyra murmured. "They are anticipating." Director Chen had appeared beside her at some point, watching the same displays. "We have been modeling the Cathvari behavior patterns since they first emerged, predicting their adaptations, preparing countermeasures. They are not intelligent in the way you or I understand. They are evolutionary pressure made manifest. But evolution is not magic. It follows rules, and we have learned the rules."
"This is only the first engagement," Thyra said. "The main swarm will arrive in 6 hours. It will be met by the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th fleets, 32,000 ships in total." Chen's voice was calm, almost conversational. "We have also deployed strategic assets throughout the projected engagement zone. Weapons platforms, minefield networks, antimatter dispensers. The Cathvari will not simply be fought, Commander. They will be channeled, contained, and systematically eliminated." Thyra stared at her. "You speak of genocide."
"I speak of survival." Chen's expression did not change. "The Cathvari have consumed 400 billion sentient beings. They will consume more if they are not stopped. We did not start this war, Commander, but we will finish it." The main engagement began at dawn, station time. Thyra had not slept, could not sleep. She stood in the observation lounge as the displays showed her something that should have been impossible. The Cathvari swarm was vast, a mass of organisms that filled space for thousands of kilometers in every direction. At its height, it had been the most terrifying force in the known galaxy. It had destroyed the Volanthi Ascendancy, the Hegemony, the Crystalline Collective, and a dozen other civilizations. It broke against humanity like water against stone. The human fleets did not meet the swarm head-on. They encircled it, contained it, drove it toward prepared killing grounds where automated weapons platforms waited in dense formations. The Cathvari, for all their mindless aggression, were being herded, and they did not even realize it. Hours passed. The swarm's numbers dwindled. Billions of organisms, then millions, then thousands. The human ships maintained their discipline, their coordination, their terrible efficiency. They did not celebrate their victories or mourn their losses. They simply continued.
By midday, it was over.
Not the war. The war would continue for months as human forces swept through the regions the Kethvari had claimed, hunting down every last pocket of resistance, sterilizing every world where the organisms had taken root. But the existential threat, the unstoppable swarm that had seemed like the end of all things, had been broken in less than a day. Thyra sank into a chair, her legs unable to support her. She had watched her civilization die. She had watched the Kethvari consume everything she loved, unstoppable and eternal. And she had just watched a species her ancestors had dismissed as primitive destroy them with clinical, calculated efficiency. "How?" she asked when Chen appeared beside her again. "How is this possible?" Chen considered the question for a long moment. "Do you know what your founders wrote about us 8,000 years ago? We have records, fragments of observations they made before they sealed this region of space." "I do not." "They called us survivors of a death world. They noted that our planet's conditions were unusually hostile. Extreme temperature variations, frequent geological upheaval, a biosphere defined by constant competition and predation. They theorized that any species that evolved under such conditions would be inherently violent, unable to achieve lasting civilization." Chen paused. They were right about the violence. They were wrong about the civilization. She moved to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "We are violent, Commander. We carry that heritage in our genes, in our history, in the way we approach every problem. But we also learned something that your founders never understood. Violence is not the opposite of civilization. It is the price of it. Every society worth building has been defended by those willing to fight for it. Every peace worth keeping has been maintained by those prepared for war."
"We had warriors," Thyra said weakly. "We had fleets."
"You had soldiers. You had military forces, but they were separate from your civilization, weren't they? A necessary inconvenience, something your people tolerated but did not embrace." Chen turned to face her. "Humanity does not separate the warrior from the citizen. Every one of our people is taught to fight, to prepare, to sacrifice if necessary, not because we glorify violence, but because we understand that the universe does not care about our preferences. It will send Kethvari, or something like them, regardless of how peaceful we wish to be." Thyra thought of the Velanthi military, elite, professional, and utterly detached from the civilian population. When the Kethvari came, her people had expected the fleet to handle the problem. They had not considered that the problem might be larger than any fleet could contain. "You built your entire civilization around the expectation of extinction-level threats," she said slowly.
"We built it around the determination to survive them," Chen corrected. "There is a difference."
The days that followed blurred together in Thyra's exhausted mind. She watched as human forces swept through the former territories of the Ascendancy, cataloging the devastation, searching for survivors, eliminating the remnants of the Kethvari infestation. They found some, scattered populations on remote worlds, a few ships that had escaped the initial massacre, and brought them to safety with the same efficiency they had brought to war. Yerith came to her on the 5th day, his expression strange. "Commander, you should see this." He led her to a communications center where human operators were coordinating relief efforts across a dozen systems. On one screen, she saw Velanthi refugees being unloaded from human transports, not into camps or holding facilities, but into what appeared to be permanent housing. Medical teams were treating the injured, teachers were working with the children, counselors were meeting with those who had watched their worlds burn. "They are rebuilding," Yerith said, "not just rescuing, rebuilding. They are preparing worlds for our people to settle. They are sharing their technology, their resources, their expertise. They are treating us not as refugees, but as partners,
Thyra watched a human medic carefully treating a Volanthe elder, her alien hands gentle despite their obvious strength. Why, after everything our ancestors did, the quarantine, the centuries of dismissal, why would they help us?
I asked Director Chen the same question. Yirith hesitated. She said something I did not fully understand. She said, "We know what it is to be alone in the dark. We will not impose that on others."
Thyra closed her eyes. For 400 years, she had served the Volanthe ascendancy with absolute loyalty. She had believed in its superiority, its wisdom, its eternal nature. And now, standing in a human station surrounded by human generosity, she understood how terribly wrong her people had been.
Not just about humanity, about everything.
The ascendancy had looked at the universe and seen inferiors to be managed, resources to be exploited, empty voids to be ignored. They had never considered that the void might be full of potential they simply refused to see.
They had never considered that the primitives they dismissed might one day be their only hope of survival. Director Chen found her later that evening, still in the observation lounge, still staring at the stars.
"The military operation is proceeding ahead of schedule," Chen reported. "We estimate complete elimination of the Kethvari threat within 3 months. After that, we will begin restoration efforts on the affected worlds, environmental remediation, infrastructure reconstruction, population resettlement."
For the Volanthe?
For everyone, the hegemony survivors, the crystalline remnants, all the species that were caught in this disaster. Chen paused. We have already begun diplomatic contacts with the other galactic powers, the ones who, like your founders, chose to ignore us for millennia.
Thyra felt a chill. "And what do you intend to say to them?"
Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Thyra was only beginning to understand. "We intend to offer them the same thing we offered you: partnership, alliance, the chance to face the universe's dangers together instead of alone."
"And if they refuse?"
Then they will face those dangers without us. We will not force cooperation, Commander. We will not build an empire through conquest or intimidation. That has never been our way. Chen's expression hardened slightly. But we will also not permit ourselves to be dismissed, ignored, quarantined like a disease. The galaxy has learned that there are things in the void it cannot defeat. Now, it will learn that some of those things are willing to help.
Thyra turned back to the viewport. Out there, somewhere, were the burned husks of worlds she had loved, the graves of billions she had failed to save, the ruins of a civilization that had thought itself eternal.
And here, surrounding her, was a species that had been alone in the dark for 8,000 years, and had used that time to become something the galaxy had never imagined possible.
"Your founders made a mistake," she said quietly. "They thought the void was empty. They thought there was nothing here worth knowing."
"And now?"
Chen asked. Thyra thought of the fleets she had watched shatter the Kethvari swarm. The efficiency, the coordination, the terrible purpose. She thought of the relief workers caring for refugees, the diplomats extending hands to former enemies, the entire civilization mobilized not for conquest, but for survival, their own and everyone else's.
"Now I understand," she said. "The void was never empty. It was just waiting. And what grew there in the darkness while we were too arrogant to look?"
She turned to face Director Chen, this small, soft, impossibly dangerous being who represented everything the Volanthi had failed to understand.
What grew there was hope.
Chen's smile, this time, held warmth. Perhaps, or perhaps what grew there was just us. Stubborn, violent, determined to survive no matter the cost. Humanity has never been gentle, Commander. We do not pretend to be.
Then what are you?
Chen considered the question. Outside the viewport, a human fleet passed by, thousands of ships moving in perfect formation, their hulls still scarred from battle, their crews already preparing for the next mission.
We are what happens when you leave a death world's children alone for 8,000 years, she said finally. We are what grows in the void when nothing else is watching. We are the answer to every species that thought the darkness was safe because it was empty. She met Thyra's compound eyes with her own strange alien gaze. We are humanity, and the void was never empty. It was just ours.
Months passed. The Vethrani were eradicated, not just defeated, but systematically eliminated, their biomass converted to fuel and materials for reconstruction. Human fleets patrolled former Ascendancy space, maintaining order while the survivors began the long process of rebuilding.
Thyra was offered a position in the provisional government, a coalition of surviving species working alongside human advisors to reconstruct what had been lost. She accepted because there was nothing else left, and because she had come to understand something that changed everything she thought she knew.
The galaxy was not what she had believed it to be. It was not a collection of advanced civilizations managing their own affairs in elegant isolation. It was a dark forest, full of predators and dangers beyond imagination. And the only species that had truly understood this were the ones everyone else had dismissed as primitives.
Humanity had not built their civilization despite being alone. They had built it because they were alone. Every challenge they faced, every crisis they survived, had made them stronger, more unified, more prepared. While the Ascendancy was debating philosophy and the hegemony was pursuing profit, humanity was quietly becoming the most powerful force in the galaxy. And they had done it in silence, in the void, in the nothing that everyone else had ignored.
On the anniversary of the Vethrani defeat, Thyra stood on the surface of a reconstructed world, one of the first Volanthi colonies to be fully restored, and watched the sun set over forests that had been replanted by human environmental teams.
Director Chen stood beside her, as she often did these days. The human had become something between a colleague and a friend, though Thyra still struggled to fully understand her.
I never asked you, Thyra said. When your founders were alone in the void, when no one came to help or even acknowledge their existence, did they ever despair? Did they ever consider giving up?
Chen was silent for a long moment. Of course they did. We are not machines, Commander. We felt every century of isolation, every generation that was born, lived, and died without ever knowing if anyone else existed. Every child who looked up at the stars and wondered why the universe seemed so empty. She watched the setting sun, her expression unreadable. But despair is a luxury we could never afford. If we had given up, if even one generation had decided the struggle was not worth it, there would be no humanity today. So we didn't. We kept building, we kept preparing, we kept believing that someday, somehow, we would find a place in the cosmos, even if we had to make that place ourselves.
And now you have. Now we have.
Chen smiled, and for once it seemed genuine,
And we find ourselves in an unexpected position. The galaxy that ignored us needs us. The civilizations that dismissed us as primitive are looking to us for guidance. The void that everyone thought was empty is suddenly the most important region of space in existence.
Does that bring you satisfaction?
Chen considered the question carefully. It brings me responsibility. We did not become what we are to rule the galaxy, Commander. We became what we are to survive it. But now that we have, we face a choice. We can use our power to dominate, to punish those who ignored us, to build the very empire your ancestors feared. Or we can use it to do what no one did for us. Extend a hand to those who are struggling. Help them become stronger. Make sure no species ever has to face the void alone.
And which will you choose?
Chen turned to face her, and in her eyes Thyra saw something that transcended species, something universal. We will choose what we have always chosen, survival. Not just ours, but everyone's. Because we learned something in those 8,000 years of isolation, Commander. We learned that the universe is too dangerous to face alone. We learned that strength without compassion is just cruelty, and compassion without strength is just weakness.
And we learned that the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies, it is making them unnecessary.
She looked back at the sunset, at the forests that were growing where ash had been, at the future that was being rebuilt from the ruins of the past. Your founders thought the void was empty. They thought there was nothing there worth knowing, nothing that could ever threaten them or help them. They were wrong. But perhaps their mistake was a gift. Perhaps if they had known we were there, they would have tried to control us or destroy us or absorb us into their empire. Perhaps they would have prevented us from becoming what we needed to become.
Her voice softened. So perhaps we should thank them in a way. Their arrogance gave us the greatest gift anyone could have given. They gave us time, and we used it well. Thyra watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, human ships were patrolling the borders of known space, watching for the next threat. Somewhere up there, human scientists were developing new technologies, preparing new defenses. Somewhere up there, human diplomats were building alliances that would reshape the galaxy for millennia to come. The void had never been empty. It had been a crucible, forging something the universe had never seen before. Something born of isolation and hardship. Something that had learned to face the darkness not with fear, but with determination. Something that had become hope itself. My people made many mistakes, Thyra said finally. But the greatest was not seeing what was right in front of us. We looked at the void and saw nothing. We should have looked closer.
And what would you have seen? Thyra turned to her friend, her human friend, this strange and terrifying and magnificent being who represented everything her species had failed to understand.
We would have seen the future, she said, waiting for us, ready to save us from ourselves.
The stars shone down on them, cold and distant and eternal. And somewhere in the void, humanity continued its vigil, watching, waiting, preparing for whatever came next. Because the void was never empty. It was just patient, and what dwelt within it had all the time in the universe.